And Pope Francis was the first Jesuit Pope in the history of the Catholic Church. It had a significant impact on his papacy. David Braithwaite is a Jesuit priest with St Canice's parish in Sydney, and he joins us now. David Braithwaite, welcome. So first of all, your reflections on the passing of the Pope.
Well, like most people, I was deeply shocked to hear the news, even though maybe we shouldn't have been. He'd obviously been suffering, but we thought he'd bounced back. So shock and sadness, a little bit of trepidation at what's next, like everyone around the world, especially Catholics, but also, I'd say, an immense, even overwhelming sense of gratitude for this man's life of service to the Church.
We've been speaking this evening about how he was a man of many firsts, one of which is in being a Jesuit. You are also a Jesuit priest, as we mentioned, with St Canice's parish in Sydney. How did that help define his papacy, and how did it help him do it differently to his predecessors?
It's interesting. I think when he was first made Pope, most Jesuits I spoke to were shocked. It had never happened before. The idea that you'd have a Jesuit as Pope was more or less unthinkable, I would say.
Why was that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think just historically, perhaps if you go back far enough, a few centuries, the Jesuits were seen to have a great deal of influence, perhaps an outsized influence for an order, a missionary order, and so to have a Pope who was also a Jesuit may have seemed to be too much concentration of power, perhaps. However, whatever the genesis of it, that was certainly almost a commonplace understanding that you couldn't have a Jesuit Pope. Then, of course, we had a Jesuit Pope. As a Jesuit, seeing him in his early days of his papacy, there was a wonderful sense of recognition of what you would hope a Jesuit would be. Direct, straightforward, focused on mission, particularly with what we call, and the whole Church calls, an option for the poor, which he manifested in his day-to-day. He embodied it, really, as well as preached about it and spoke about it.
So what would go into that in a bit more detail for us? What were the practical examples of how he wrapped his arms around the poor?
Well, we saw it so often in his gestures, didn't we, as much as anything, but his constant preferencing of those who are on the edge, even literally the edge of the crowd. People with disability, trans people.
Edge of the world.
Edge of the world, appointing cardinals from places we all had to get out the map and see where they were from. And he did it with a sort of a joie de vivre, a peace, really. He took, obviously, Francis as his name, and originally some people thought, oh, that's Francis Xavier, the famous Jesuit missionary. It wasn't, of course, as we know, it was Francis of Assisi. And thinking of Pope Francis's life, I can't help but think of the line from Francis of Assisi, preach often and, if necessary, use words. This sense of a man who embodied a love for those who felt unloved or forgotten, especially by the Church.
By preferencing the marginalised in oftentimes cases over the mainstream, was there any criticism of that?
Oh, I think, yes, absolutely. Anyone who was following Twitter and the kind of social media world particularly, or some outspoken North American critics who were very critical of Pope Francis, they were not the mainstream of the American episcopacy or even most Catholics. But without a doubt, sure, he was seen to be leftist or whatever they would brand him as. Of course, he transcended left and right. He wasn't interested in any of that. It was about closeness. He said himself, in a way, he was about the style of God, and he called it closeness, compassion, and tenderness. And that transcends politics or culture wars. And his whole life, he transcended that sort of preoccupation that often those in the West have, particularly with politics, shall we say, and that lens on the Church.
And so what do you think of the job he did? And I'm just interested to hear your perspective as a Jesuit. Is there a sense when someone from your order does get elevated to that kind of role, that is there a sense that our guy is there and he's going to do a good job?
I don't think it was quite like that for most Jesuits, although it's understandable to think of it that way. More of a sort of, yes, without a doubt, a heartwarming sense that this man we may understand each other, shall we say, and looking at him, the way he behaved in his papacy, there were some lovely moments of, as I said before, a recognition that this is the kind of Jesuit you would hope to be yourself, perhaps, or you'd like to see a Jesuit be in that simple, direct, straightforward, and simple style of life. That he really made a hallmark of his papacy, even moving out of the palace into something simpler at the little hotel there for guests. Being closer to people, I suppose, was something he wanted to achieve in his papacy, and he surely did.
What would some of the Catholics that you have gotten to know in your everyday life, what were some of the conversations that you might have had about him over the years and the work that he's done?
Look, that's been possibly one of the most fascinating things about Francis's papacy. The people who are very much on the edge or who are anti-church even, particularly, I'm an inner city parish priest, and we have a kitchen for people who are homeless, who are at risk of homelessness or housing vulnerability. They come in for a free meal. Many, many people felt his welcome, his global call of welcome affected them personally, individually. I think especially people who, on the fuzzy boundaries of not just the church but general accepted society, felt that in Francis they had a friend.
Somewhere to belong.
Yeah, someone who preached to Jesus Christ, a message that felt true and resonated.
Would you regard his papacy as being one that marked by being socially progressive? What was he? To what extent was he? And to what extent did he address the big issue, one of the main issues confronting the church over the past 50, 60 years of sexual abuse?
Well, yeah, he struggled, I think, like every church leader, to come to terms with those horrific, the reality of church abuse. But he certainly took it deeply seriously. That's very clear from the way he spoke and his actions, his moving on certain cases that perhaps hadn't been moved on. The reality, though, of Francis as well is that once again you can't put him in left or right boxes. He championed the environment. Laudato Si was one of his second encyclical that was incredibly influential around the world, championing the need to take seriously care for God's creation. Now, was that progressive? Was that, in a sense, it's profoundly traditional, going back to Francis of Assisi, this love of creation and to be grateful for what we've been given and to care for it, to steward creation. On other issues, he was, you would say, most definitely progressive, shall we say, around the need to have systems that care for those who are poor, disadvantaged or marginalised.
And on women?
Yeah, promoting women to leadership.
Well, look, exactly. Appointing the first woman to run a dicastery in Rome. There's no, it just hadn't been done before. Like having a Jesuit Pope. He was, as you said there, Joe, at the beginning, a Pope of many firsts. And that was a really powerful statement. And we'll see how that reverberates further on and gives strength to those others around the world, other church leaders who take courage from that kind of bold action.
It's interesting you touched on the environment. A couple of our guests this evening has made mention of that being one of his key legacies. Why do you think the environment was so important to him?
I think he saw in it just a core value of Christianity, to steward creation. But also he was a man of science. His original degree was in chemistry, I think. He wasn't oblivious to the mountain of data around climate change and the threat, especially though, particularly to the global south, for want of a better expression. This is, of course, his concern. Probably, though he never said it this way, but to displace the world's focus on the North American lens or the North American issues, and to say, well, there's a whole world out there that sees things differently, for whom climate change is a pressing existential threat.
We had one guest on earlier tonight, and I think he said it was a bit strange that he'd appointed a cardinal from East Timor. What's your perspective on the way this Pope went about appointing cardinals?
Well, I'm like anyone else, sort of, in the bleachers watching this with my popcorn or whatever. It was stimulating and exciting that he would choose people from, shall we say, the edge of the world. But of course, where they are, they're not on the edge.
Yeah.
And to make that point that the consistory of cardinals, when they get together, should be a meeting of all these different perspectives. But once again, particularly from those nations who are often excluded in the news cycle.
Will that make the vote more complex, given that some of these cardinals are coming from vast reaches now?
Yeah, I'm not one of these professional Vatican watchers. You'll probably have one of them on at some point. I certainly think it makes it fascinating to think, what will this group of men from these literally the four corners of the world, from remote places, from poor countries, what will they do? How will the Holy Spirit move through them and with them? It is fascinating. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
And will you be there to see what happens? Is there a drive for you, being a Jesuit? Do you want to be over there now and be part of this extraordinary process that happens in Rome over the coming months?
Well, that would be great fun to watch. But no, I'm a foot soldier. You know, I've got my parish to look after. Yeah. But we'll all be praying for Pope Francis, of course, together and watching, like the rest of the world, for what happens next.
Have you had a chance to speak to any of your parishioners over the last few hours since the news broke of Pope Francis's passing?
It's really interesting. I was inundated with text messages and various other messages, different platforms from people. I would say especially young people. I used to work with university students. They're getting a bit older now, but now they don't necessarily come to Mass a lot. I would love them to come to Mass more often. But they were deeply moved, one after another, at Francis's passing. And I think that says something too about his reach to young people, particularly.
And no doubt you'll have more conversations and more interactions with your parishioners over the ensuing days.
Oh, absolutely. And I look forward to that, to be able to hear their impressions. But also, we come together to pray for him, on his journey to his eternal reward, and to pray for the Church, without a doubt. Yeah.
Okay, David Braithwaite, thanks so much for coming in and having a chat to us.
Thank you very much.
And do you want to get a plug in for some Canices while you're here?
Oh, well, thank you, Joe.
He knows to look down the barrel of the camera.
You've been there, yeah. Well, any billionaires out there who want to help us, we do feed about 150 people a day, and it costs a lot of money. So stcanice.org.au. Please,
Thank you, David.
if you want to donate. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
God bless. Thanks.